Hi English class. I'm Professor Angelone. This is the mug that you don't have to see from 2 to 3:20 on Mondays and Wednesdays. So this is for both my face-to-face class and my online class, but what I'm just trying to do is work with video, work with asynchronous and synchronous assignments. Asynchronous means I post a video to YouTube, put the link on D2Well, you watch it, you check in with me after you're done, or with one another on a discussion board. Or synchronous means that we do a live online chat room. That's a synchronous assignment. Synchronous is much more difficult. It's not required that I do synchronous assignments in my online classes, but it just seems that some instructors have chatted in real time with students in groups, small groups, one-on-one, lectured to a larger group, and then questions would get asked while the teacher was lecturing. So what I want to do is, I only have 15 minutes to work with these videos, so I'm going to try to keep them 15 minutes long. I talked yesterday in my face-to-face class about the books we're reading, and I wanted to show you the two most important ones to start with. Let the Water Hold Me Down has a big heart on it. It's by Michael Spurgeon. It's out of our college press that I helped begin, Ad Lumen Press. It's a great novel. The reason we're reading it is because we're going to study literature on the one hand. That's part of the class, it's the content. I'm not making you read anthologies where there are themed topics within each chapter. So, for instance, you may be writing a cause-effect essay and then you read a series of snippets from selected publications. And for me, those publications represent something. The editor put them together, that's great, but when we look at a snippet from the USA Today and it's in a book, we don't realize that person, the editor, that went through, carefully selected particular publications to put in their anthology, their book, and on a particular theme. Let's say homelessness in America is one theme I remember teaching at the University of California, and they made us teach that content. And the next one they made us teach was in environmental concepts. But remember, I was a writing teacher, but all of the readings focused on areas in sociology, history, all different kinds of disciplines outside my own. So a lot of my colleagues go, oh, you use like novels in your English Writing 300 class? Isn't that English Writing 301? And I say no, because I'm not an expert on homelessness. I'm an expert on English studies. So one part of English studies is the study of literature. Another part is creative writing. But the definition of creative writing I have problems with. I think all writing is creative. That's a composition teacher saying that. Creative writing professors will completely probably have maybe a similar point of view but with a difference, or a completely different point of view, or within a slight agreement to that definition. But everything for me is a creative endeavor. We just happen to call novels creative, and we call essays about novels, essays. So, but they're still both really involve the same concepts. If you're considering an audience, who are my readers? Who will buy this book? Who will read it? You're considering your voice for that audience. If this group's buying it, what kind of stories does that group, what kind of voice does that group need or require or like to get them to buy another book? Remember, it is a market. They're trying to sell them. It's not, remember, art isn't completely for free all the time. I'm looking at the book, that's why I'm talking about it. So, and last, taking in consideration audience consideration, the voice for the audience. Also, you have to think about too the amount of revision and drafting goes into a text like that. I helped edit this book, and it took about 26 drafts. If you think about how many times it was actually saved in a Word doc, and the different dates it was saved in the times, at least that many drafts. Even to the end, we have a couple of typos in the book still, so that just goes to show you the learning curve for putting together a novel. I didn't write it. Michael lived this experience in Mexico. It's a book about a man named Hank who needs to, who has an unfortunate tragedy happen to him immediately in the first 8 pages of the book, and he remembers an old buddy, the godfather of his child, if he can move down to Mexico and live with him, and he moves down there and he lives through some interesting times in Mexico that really happened while Michael was there. He lived through it. He was a bartender, and he was living down in Chiapas, Mexico when this happened in '94, and then he wrote a book about it. So it's great. The book that we're reading that is also concerned with the content of the class is Critical Theory Today, a User-Friendly Guide. Mine is torn to pieces. We'll be looking at a number of criticisms, and when we talk about criticism, what we're talking about is lenses, ways of seeing a text. And it's very popular. It had its heyday in the 20th century, and now a lot of the ideas are discounted by scholars, and they try to suggest that, theories have gone too far. And when I say theories, I mean ways of seeing, ideologies. So the argument in this text is that critical theory is a movement that challenged the way we read and analyze art. It suggested that because of certain movements that happened throughout history, that movement gave way to a new way of seeing things, and then that new way of seeing things branched out beyond politics. It branched out beyond, just the state of where lines were drawn on the maps. It also found its way into the arts, especially the arts. The artists themselves who adopted these social movements, these causes, what they did was they decided to apply those ideas because it branches out to the area of English studies. And so, for instance, you take the idea of feminism. It's a concept that comes from the 20th century. It has its obvious connections to Europe as well as the United States and North America, South America even. And so we see that this movement, this social movement, goes into literary studies, and I'll show you how. In Tyson's book, she talks about the Great Gatsby at the end of each chapter. So when she's talking about feminism, she is saying feminism is this, feminism is that, here's a definition of feminism, here's the history of feminism, here are the big names in feminism, and it gets dry, and it gets long sometimes. The best part is when she applies that theory to the Great Gatsby. So she'll say, all right, her thesis essentially is there is not a single good woman in this book, The Great Gatsby. And if you've read it, if you start thinking about it, you go, oh yeah. Next. Not to suggest that Fitzgerald, because he's the author of the book, who wrote the book, had a problem with the New World woman of the 1920s, the flapper, doing the can-can and cutting their hair short and wearing rather short dresses and showing off their legs. And before that, it was like, hey man, check out her ankle and her wrist. What a slut. And that was the Victorian era. And then now it's like 30 years, 40 years later, women are cutting their hair short, dancing this really risque dance, and the world is changing. And again, for the better, for the worse, I would make the argument for the better. Rights were given, so on and so forth, and it just slowly started. We slowly started to see from the social movement is that this patriarchal society, this male-dominated society, had this impact on women, and they had snapped out of it for a moment and stepped outside themselves and looked at the situation and went, "Wait a minute, this has a lot to do with just the way we perceive our world." And then women in the field of English studies went, "I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book about how a woman character whose perceptions are framed by this patriarchal society which she lives in that puts a straitjacket on her." And I mean, immediately it comes to mind is Kate Chopin's The Awakening for me. For literature, early literature, that sort of challenged the status quo, that sort of played a role in the social movement. So feminism itself becomes a label, like anything. Wow, these chips are tasty. What should we call them? And then Doritos. Okay, so feminism is the stamp, the branding on that social movement's ideologies. Okay? And so on that social movement's ideologies, feminism then is broken down by Tyson in her book and applied to The Great Gatsby And she basically says, because of the way I see this text, just utilizing this tool, not saying that that tool is correct, just saying this is the way a feminist would view this text, and it says a great deal about the text and what we can learn about it in multiple ways. It's really about the onion effect, so to speak, where there's multiple layers to things, and just seeing it one-dimensionally is not a good thing to be in order to be a student in English studies. So to tell you what essentially we do and how that plays a role in what we feel to be an important part of one of the basic pillars of civilization, which is the arts, is that our analysis of it speaks a great deal about ourselves as human beings. That's it. That's all it really is about. So it's a great endeavor for many of us. So with feminism, what we learn is that the novel itself, not Fitzgerald, but the novel, from a feminist perspective, is uncomfortable with the new woman of the 1920s, the flapper of the 20s. And that's her thesis. And she goes, let me show you how. Inevitably, any good writer will break it down by character if that's her thesis. So that's what she does. And she applies it by each character. Myrtle Wilson, she's cheating on her husband, George, because she was sold on the idea that he was a rich man, but he borrowed his suit to get married that day, and she didn't know about it till later, that he was a grease monkey working in a mechanic auto shop. And she didn't like that, so she's having an affair with this rich guy, Tom Buchanan. It's great. Tom Buchanan, we'll get to the men later, but the women, essentially, their identity in the novel is not presented in necessarily a moral way by any standard, especially a standard that people from the times before the 20s, the Victorians, the sort of the period of morality and as far as I'm concerned, the most uptight point in history, but either way, where women were straitjacketed literally with corsets and tight dresses and fainting couches. Go down to Old Sacramento, take a tour. Halfway up staircases in Old Victorians, there used to be little zones where like they had couches set up so that women, after they get to the top with their ribs collapsing on their lungs, could faint in 108-degree weather in Sacramento with no air conditioning. Just imagine. So women actually literally had to fit a role and fit into something that men wanted, which was big hips, small waist, good breeder. And some people say that's normal, and that's just a part of our gender. But feminists argue that gender is a social construction. And so her application of how women fit into this role of gender bias or gender stereotypes, and how that representation of women makes the novel uncomfortable, I find to be a very profound thesis statement that she proves. And so it's important, I suppose, as an English student, to consider that perspective in order to have a bit greater understanding. But then if I read it from a completely different point of view, from like a psychological point of view, which is chapter 2 in the book, you start immediately seeing it has nothing to do with gender, it has everything to do with the way we're built psychologically, and all these people suffer from core issues and the way they deal with things. So that's that part of the class. We're studying that. That's the content. The subject is English. So under reading material on D2L, you'll see under content, go down to reading material, you'll see like 7 pieces of outside sources that I've carefully selected that relate to also the study of writing. Not the study of literature, but the study of writing, and the study of writing about literature, entering into what they call discourse communities, that when you're speaking as an English student, there's a particular way, then when you're speaking as a sociology student in a particular way, that you need to be able to adapt. But essentially, fundamentally speaking, our approaches to writing we've gotten all wrong, and at the college level, I'm here to try to give you my expertise in the area of rhetoric and composition studies and tell you how you enter into conversations, how to demystify the academic speak that students try to use when they hear or read academic writing and they go, I need to sound like that. So this is my first video at 14 minutes and 30 seconds. To recap real quick with 30 seconds left, always check D2L. It's going to be where I post news, videos perhaps, discussion boards. Buy these books and then order the rest of the books if you want to along the semester. I have the calendar up to the 7th week, but most importantly realize this. One part of this class is content, books, and theories applied to books, and one part of the class is the subject of writing. Have a nice day.